Regardless if you're just starting to work from home or you've been doing it for a while, security should be at the top of your list for priorities. I'm Cherokee Boose from IT Pro TV, and in this video, I'm going to cover 12 tips to secure your home Wi-Fi networks. Hi, as you can see, I'm working from home today, as a lot of you may be doing as well. So I wanted to really talk about that and how we can secure our home networks. And it's interesting because we've been thrust and propelled into this new territory. It's very turbulent. And, in the past, we have an innate instinct to know how to protect our families and people that we care about. But when it comes to protecting our home networks, especially if you're doing remote work for your organization at home, you have to think about how you're going to protect your organization and protect your customers, especially if you're dealing with customer data. And that's not necessarily an instinct. This is going to be a learned behavior. So that's why I want to take some time to cover these things with you today. So I don't know if you're familiar with these types of things. They're called onions, okay? And yes, this one's a little deformed looking, but that's okay. It's great for this purpose. I have this idea, this concept. It's called the Shrek methodology. And it basically states, well, if you've ever seen the Disney movie Shrek, you know that ogres are like onions. They have many layers. You can peel the layers back, right? So, when it comes to security, especially home security here, any type of security really, you should have something that's called defense in depth, and it should have multiple layers to your security strategy. Unfortunately, we don't have an on or off switch. Like I can't just say, nope, now my network's secure. Doesn't really work like that. So I'm going to cover some of the most important things that you can do right from home. So let's get started. We're not going to be talking about Shrek or something like that, but we are going to be talking about your home routers first. So take a look at your individual device. It might be Linksys. It might be a ASUS product. It might be TP-Link. It might be D-Link. Those are going to be your typical models or brands, I should say, with different models varying. And each individual router may have they typically have their own custom settings that you'll need to look up straight from the manufacturer. So just kind of getting that out of the way. This is not a one-stop shop here. I'm giving you guidance, okay? So I think that the first step here, let's take a look at our home network security checklist, if you will, and cover the first step. So the first step that I have is going to be have a basic understanding of IP addresses. So IP stands for Internet Protocol. So Internet Protocol addresses, what are they? Why should you care? Well, if we think about how humans communicate, we typically use names to draw attention to one another. So, computers and devices, endpoints, they're going to be using those IP addresses to communicate amongst themselves. So, your wireless router, have at minimum two different IP addresses. So, first you have your external IP address. This is outward facing towards the internet, and that's assigned to you by your ISP, your internet service provider. Next, you have your internal IP address, and this is the IP address that you use inside of your home for your devices to communicate amongst each other. And then that router acts as a middleman, so to speak, your gateway to go ahead and send traffic outside of your network. Now, you can change your internal IP address. This is something a little more advanced and you don't necessarily have to do. It's not that you're implementing a security configuration at this point. But what you're doing, let's think about this for a second. If hackers know that there's some sort of gain or reward for getting into your network, then they're going to try. But let's not make it easy for them. So there's a concept called security through obscurity. And that's what you're doing is just giving them, if they already know this IP address and they type it and it works, that's easy for them. So let's make it harder. You can change that. But if not, if you don't know how, don't worry about that. So know the difference between those two IP addresses. And the reason that that second one, your internal, is so important is because this is the way that you navigate to your management console. So that's how you manage and configure your router device. So, talking about changing these defaults here, I want to bring us to our next point, which is going to be step number two here, And I think that this is going to be the most important two defaults that you could change right away. I mean, do this as soon as possible. If you haven't already done this, like pause this video, go do this now. Okay. You need to change your SSID. You may be thinking, I don't even know what an SSID is. That's okay. I promise you do already. You just don't know the proper terminology for it. So if you think about looking on your phone for available networks to connect to, and you see that name, it's an alphanumeric, case sensitive, string that identifies a network. That's going to be your SSID, your service set identifier. All right. That's important to understand the word identifier. So it's identifying or naming your network. This is available. This information can be easily accessed by those, in a physical location and so forth. So you don't want to, again, we'll practice security through obscurity and use a name that is not identifiable to your home, your family, your organization. All right. So don't say, Kelsey's mama or the Joneses residence. Those are things that you want to avoid for your SSID. All right. Moving on. Also, change that password that you use in conjunction to log in with that SSID. So this has a few different words. I'm sure you guys have heard it be called a Wi-Fi password, but sometimes you'll go through and take a look there and you'll hear something like this is going to be our Wi-Fi security key, our product key, our master secret, and our shared key. And I had to think like I couldn't remember that. I had to look at all those because those are different terms that they basically mean the same thing, but different vendors will have different vocabulary in their, pamphlets and so forth. Like I said, it's going to vary by vendor here. So why do you care about that? Why do you, want to know to change that password? So here's the thing. Going back to defaults, most you can even do a search online. There are lists that compile and aggregate the usernames and passwords for the default usernames and passwords for the most commonly purchased and implemented home routers in across the globe, right? So if I know about this list and now you know about this list, who do you think else knows about this list? So every time you hold that button in when you're troubleshooting your wireless and you reset your home router to that default factory setting, guess what? You've just changed your username and password to that default username and password that anyone has access to. So that's really important. Just make that best practice to always do that, change that anytime you purchase a new router, anytime you reset your device. And I'll talk about ways, we can save our settings towards the end of the video. So let's get that one out of the way. Next, let's talk about using a strong network admin password for increased Wi-Fi security here. Now, this is going to be a different password than that pre-shared key that I spoke about a few seconds ago. This is going to be the password that you use when you log into your management console by accessing your internal IP address. For a long time, that's the only way that you could get into that is via, a web browser. But in today's modern, world, we also have the ability, for example, my home network, I have an application that's on my phone that I can log into and have my management console right there on my iPhone. So, of course, you have the ability to do it through the browser, but just know your device might have additional, luxury features, if you will, if you want to take advantage of that. You'll need to be getting in there to make these changes that we're going to be talking about. So having a secure password is, extremely important here. Again, we don't want to make it easy for anyone. And if you think about what is a secure password, you guys probably already know because a lot of organizations do implement that. You have to have a strong password, usually lengthy and complex, meaning a mixture of different character types. And just think about that. Please don't use very common passwords like password 123, things like that. So let's talk about enabling our wireless encryption because encryption is only good if you actually enable it. A lot of routers by default will by default they just enable encryption. But here's the thing, you always want to be a little bit skeptical. Trust but verify. So you're going to log into your management console to see what kind of encryption your router is using. Now, the first option you may see could be something like open. Not all vendors would give such an insecure option, but some of them might. So you'll look at that. You never want to set your encryption to open. That's comparable to leaving the front door of your house unlocked. We don't want to do that. Now, there are encryption standards that are older and have known security vulnerabilities, and you don't want to use those. Those are going to be things like WEP, your wired equivalent privacy, which is not equivalent to the privacy you'd see with wired networking. And then you also have WPA. WPA is a little bit better than WEP, but you really want to look for WPA2. Some routers will have an option to have a mixed mode of WPA, which means that the WPA2 is stronger, but you may have some older devices on your network that only can communicate using WPA, the original. So by dropping down and having that mixed mode, you're forfeiting some security to be able to utilize older devices. So that's a choice you have to make. I recommend not to drop down. You want to be using WPA2. As a matter of fact, the Wi-Fi Alliance has recently it's been out, but there aren't devices and products that have been approved to utilize WPA3 as of yet. It's coming, okay? So every I won't say everyone, but attackers know that WPA2 already has significant vulnerabilities. So we're working with our current most secure encryption for our wireless networks has some flaws. So you'll want to take at minimum advantage of that. Just remember, these are all different layers in our onion. So moving on, step number 5 or tip number 5, let's talk about updates and update. I know I have it written here 3 times, but you know what? It's not the same as Beetlejuice. Your updates just don't appear if you call them 3 times. The reason I'm saying this over and over, and I will again, is because it's extremely important. This is kind of a lower hanging fruit, that something that you can do quickly and easily to secure your networks. The thing is, how do I know what's on my network, right? So you can use very basic, there are free applications. One I use, I've been using it for years, is called Fing, Fing, and it performs a network analysis for your wireless devices, tells you the devices and additional information like their MAC address or names, their SSID, so to speak, right? So by looking at a tool like this, you can say, wow, what's this device? This doesn't belong on my network, or that device is really old. I haven't used it in forever. Maybe I should go check to see if there are any updates for this particular device. And looking at these devices, you have your router, right? Your router itself needs updates, believe it or not. The firmware needs to be updated. A lot of newer routers have this configuration setting optional to set it to auto update. Older routers might not have that. So you'll want to go in and verify that. If you want to look at your manufacturer's website, their support site for your particular router, check. You could even, if it's a brand new router, you could register the device so that you get emails about those security updates and patches. Okay. Um, Laptops, we're talking desktops, tablets, cell phones. So all of those individual devices need to be running the most up-to-date operating system. So that's a different discussion. We'll talk a little bit more about updates in a moment. I told you, you guys are going to be like, updates, this is crazy, but it's very important, right? So this is going to be something that you can do. Now, IoT devices, sometimes these type of devices kind of slip our minds, right? So we're talking our smartwatches, our fitness bands, thermostats, light bulbs. Yes, I am not kidding. There have been organizations that have been, hacked by light bulbs, all right? So you want to consider all of those and make sure IoT devices are very, oh, I don't even know how to explain them. They're devices that make your life easier. So they're kind of a luxury, but they also reduce that risk. Okay. Because these devices, if you think about the programmers and coders who are writing it, like the firmware for these devices, they may write it for a particular device and then move on to a next project. So after a while, they'll stop supporting those security patches and updates. And You don't know. You're none the wiser, right? So they're just kind of vulnerabilities in your network, if you will. Okay, so keep them in mind. Next, you'll want to consider to go ahead and disable DHCP or Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. Again, this would just be a setting that would allow the attackers to easily access your network. If you are a little more advanced, you could even do things. So, we're talking about disabling DHCP, implementing a static IP address range, and to take things further, you could even enable MAC address filtering. That's another conversation. The next thing I'd like you to disable is going to be WPS, is your Wi-Fi protected standard. And that particular name is very misleading because it's not going to be protected. So by disabling that, you're actually adding protection to your network. And what is it anyways? Well, if you've ever had a device where you could just push a button and push your WPS button on your router and have it connect right away without having to type or input anything, that's your WPS. So yes, it does provide ease of access, but again, you're going to be forfeiting your security. There are known vulnerabilities with that particular protocol. So here you can see I'm mentioning again, talking about firewalls, and that's because it's really important. So I kind of give you some guidelines here about your router firewall. Again, trust but verify. Check. Make sure it's enabled. Make sure you're not utilizing or giving access to ports that you're not actually using. And again, if you don't know what those are, you can always contact your IT department to see if this company specific business application is utilizing a particular port. Otherwise, keep it pretty much on lockdown. But you do want to think about your other devices. Like, let's say you're running a Windows 10 device. That's going to be your host based firewall integrated into the operating system. Now, if you follow my advice from earlier and update, then your firewalls and all of those security patches should be good to go. The only time, again, you'd ever want to change those is if you were directed to by your IT department. So let's move on to the next tip here. This is an interesting one that really not a lot of people may think about, right? And this is going to be the location of your router. And the reason this is so important is going to be to prevent signal bleed. So if I place a router next to a window, maybe street facing or facing my neighbor's window, I am essentially carrying the circumference of my router signal into their space as well. So technically, someone could be sitting on your street, having access to your network. Now, by placing your router in a central location, not only will it help eliminate that signal bleed, but you'll also have equal distance for devices in your home network, and you'll want to kind of position those devices accordingly. So just think about your router placement as well, something sometimes we forget about. Now, this one again is going to have, be you'll notice a lot with security. You kind of have to forfeit some of these luxury things in order to have the security. So here, turn off your home network for extended periods of time if you're not there. So for example, if you're going abroad for the summer, something like that, you'll want to turn your Wi-Fi networks off. An attacker can't get into it if it's not even on, right? So that again is you'll want to outweigh the pros and cons because maybe you have a security system that's Wi-Fi based and you like to look at your home. Just know that the only way to not get hacked is to have it off. So maybe, consider taking your valuables out of your home if you're going to be there for a long time on a vacation or a second residence, and then just turning your Wi-Fi off. Taking a look at step 11, harden your most frequently used devices. Why not harden all of them? Well, hardening is an approach that we take to secure these devices, and it takes time. You really have to think about and analyze each device on an individual basis because different devices have different applications. They're different types of devices. You've got laptops. So desktops, tablets, IoT devices, all of those need to be thought about differently. So let's talk about computers, right? You're going to keep them up to date. That will alleviate a lot of problems and help harden your systems. But you also want to implement things like antivirus, anti-malware, keep your browsers up to date, disable any unused software or unused add-ins to your browser. So those are all things to harden your computer systems. So when you're looking at other devices like IoT devices, for example, and you already know how I feel about that, if you are a little more comfortable and advanced with network configuration, you might want to create a separate network on your home network. So then you'll have two networks just to put those IoT devices because they are such a risk. And then your other devices can be more secure on a separate network, maybe like a guest network or something. A lot of routers already have those options pre-configured for you. The last step is the most important, and you're already taking the step in the right direction, and that is to educate yourself. And it is so important because educating yourself is going to be, well, how you protect your entire network. Now, if you are working from home, you'll want to get with your company's IT organization to make sure that you're in compliance with their security policy. If you don't know what that is, definitely reach out to them. I promise you they will be happy to accommodate as well as perhaps provide additional resources for you because the more prevention you do, that means the less mitigation they will have to do in the future. So just make yourself aware of the different types of attacks that are out there as well. Now, I know this seems like a lot of work, but there is one way that you can save some time by exporting or saving your configuration files so that if you lose power or you have to do a default restart to your router, you don't have to configure all these devices individually and you'll be able to bring that configuration file in. Again, that's a little more advanced, but just letting you know the options out there. I hope all these tips and tricks help you and give you the confidence to create a really secure home network. And if you like what you saw, check out the rest of the playlist for more working from home tips and be sure to subscribe to the IT Pro TV channel. I'm Cherokee Boose and thanks for watching.